Hello again, my name is Joanna Barratt, and I'm going to be reading another chapter from my book, Learning from Life. This book is one of a trilogy. The first book is entitled Experiences from Life, then we have Learning from Life, and the final one is Lessons from Life. And all these books complement the teachings of the Sermon on the Mount by my husband Maurice Barratt. First of all, Maurice preaches a sermon, and this one he's entitled Fulfilling the Law, Part 1. And it's taken from the part where Jesus said, I've not come to destroy the law or the prophets, I've come to fulfill it. Jesus came to fulfill the moral law, the 10 Commandments. Paul makes the point over and over again that the law is good and righteous. It is sin, not the law, that is the problems. That's from Romans 7, verses 12 to 14. The law condemns us, but it is us who need to change and not the law. Paul doesn't say we are now free from the law. What he does say is that Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law. That's Galatians 3, verse 13. The curse of the law is the consequences of breaking the law, the punishment. He also says that we are free from the law of sin and death. That's Romans 8, verse 2. Christ, by his sacrifice for us, has freed us from this law by the intervention of another law, the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus. When asked which is the first commandment of all, Jesus had a ready answer. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbour as thyself. On these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Love fulfills the law. So if love fulfills the law, then sin is just lack of love. Law breaking is a lack of love. He that loves another has fulfilled the law. I've entitled my little talk, If you can't change your circumstances, then you have to change your attitude. I was only 19 and already I was losing track of the number of times I've been sacked from my employment. First couple of weeks of every job I'd had were always exciting. There were new faces and new challenges to meet. And because of people's natural curiosity, I had lots of opportunities to witness, which I found truly fulfilling. My problems usually arose when someone in a senior position told me to do something which I felt was outside my job description, and I would automatically think that they were trying to get at me in some way. I felt duty-bound not to let them get away with this state of affairs and would righteously refuse to be put on. Obviously, my behaviour wasn't tolerated, and with some snide remark like, I thought you were supposed to be a Christian, or so that's what Christianity is, I'd be handed my cards with a pay packet and shown the door. I couldn't carry on living like this. I had an apartment to maintain, bills to pay, and I needed the security of a steady income. I scoured the situations vacant in the clerical columns yet again and came across an advert for the SOS Temporary Services Bureau, who promised to pay excellent rates for clerical staff. I called in at the bureau and I was accepted as an audio typist. My assignments would usually be to replace somebody who'd gone on holiday or was sick, and because of this, I would not normally be required for more than 2 weeks. And in many cases, I'd only be required for one particular day when somebody hadn't turned in to work. I'd be paid high rates for the hours I worked, but would not receive any payment for holidays or sickness. They were not prepared to guarantee that I would get a job every week, but assured me that if I earned a good reputation, I would be placed on a priority list and given preferential treatment. You know, this job was ideal. Work was never a problem. I always enjoyed new challenges. Because I never stayed longer than 2 weeks in any firm, It was too short a time to be bored, so I was always enthusiastic and hard-working. I very quickly earned a good reputation and was placed on that priority list. And for all the years that I worked for the Bureau, I was kept in employment every single week that I was available for service. In many of the firms I worked, I was asked to stay permanently. But even though I knew that this meant security where sickness and holidays were concerned, I never trusted that I would be able to cope with authority. So I opted to remain on the Bureau. Then one week, I was asked to go to an insurance company. I'd never worked in a typing field before, so this was novel. I was seated in what looked like a classroom, filled with desks bearing typewriters and dictaphone machines. All the desks faced the same way, except the one that was at the head of the room where the supervisor sat. And each girl was expected to churn out 60 letters a day. And if that quota was not met, she was expected to remain after working hours until she'd completed the quota. While most of the girls found the work grueling and hated working here, me, on the other hand, I found this quota a great challenge, and each day I would have races with myself to see if I could beat my previous day's record. I never failed to meet the quota, and some days I was able to churn out over 100 letters, as I looked on my time here as a great opportunity to work on both speed and accuracy. The boss was pleased with me and often requested that I became a permanent member of his staff. But that female supervisor was continually looking for ways to get at me. As being a temp, I received far more attention and a higher wage than she did. If I'd been permanent, I know that her attitude would have really got to me. But every time I felt anger rise, I would continually tell myself, I didn't work for this insurance company. I work for the Bureau, and they would probably place me somewhere else next week. I'm constantly amazed at the way this job offered me the opportunity to brainwash myself with this type of thinking. For what seemed like an eternity, the Bureau would ring me each Friday and ask if I would be prepared to stay with this insurance company for another week, as the job I had been covering wasn't yet fulfilled. And each Friday, I'd consent thinking, well, this could be the last week I would be there. My altered mentality allowed me to remain untouched by this supervisor's provocation. And because I wasn't so sensitive, I could understand her feelings. Throughout the whole 9 months that the Bureau kept me at this company, I was able to maintain my Christian witness purely because my change of attitude stopped me feeling touchy and defensive. Never before had I felt so free or held a job down for so long. At the age of 30, after a number of years of working for the church on a voluntary basis, I once again found it necessary to job hunt. So I scoured the secretarial situations vacant column in the newspaper and wrote off for interviews, enclosing my CV. I must have made a tremendous impression, as not one of the firms I wrote to invited me to attend for an interview. I resorted to Plan B and registered with the Bureau as a temp whilst looking for a permanent position. So it amused me to be given an assignment at one of the firms I'd written to for an interview and been refused. AMEC Properties, a big construction company. They were setting up a new branch in Manchester and were looking for staff. Whilst they were interviewing people, temporary aid was sought and I was brought in as a girl Friday, which meant that I mucked in and did everything from running errands to the sandwich shop at lunchtime to taking shorthand notes in board meetings. You know, I attacked every new challenge with gusto and enthusiasm and thoroughly enjoyed the variety that was offered to me in this particular job. And it wasn't long before the manager asked if I would stay on as a permanent member of staff. Recruitments to the firm meant that jobs began to be more defined, and to my surprise, I found that I'd actually been promoted to the top secretarial position, second only to the manager's secretary who had worked at another branch and been brought in with her boss to establish this new company. At first, this more senior secretary had been very friendly and jovial with me, but maybe because she was an older woman, it appeared to me that she now began to see me as a threat and made life exceedingly difficult for me. The company wasn't yet established, and refurbishment was still going on in the offices, which meant that until the work was completed, we had to work together in a very limited area. Brenda, the manager's secretary, she never bothered to hide her feelings towards me and did her best to belittle and embarrass me. I didn't have it in me to retaliate. I was a Christian. I enjoyed my job and certainly didn't want to make an enemy of her. But she saw my attitude of sweetness and innocence and termed it as cunning and deceitful. During one particular period, she managed to get almost the whole firm to send me to Coventry. If people wanted to speak to me, they left curt little notes on my desk. They'd talk and laugh with each other, but totally ignore me. I can't tell you how awful the experience was. And often in prayer, I was reduced to tears whilst begging God to sort out this situation. On one of Manchester's cold, crusty days, it was obvious to me that Brenda was in pain. Months before, she'd noticed a little clicking noise in her knee, and she'd gone to the doctors to have it examined. The click hadn't caused her any pain, it had just been an annoyance which she wanted to get rid of. After much probing and examination, she ended up going to hospital for an operation on her knee, which resulted in her being on crutches, unable to walk, and in constant pain. I felt really sorry for her, as I realised she wasn't putting the agony on. The weather outside was bleak, and I knew that she would have a 10-minute walk at least to pick up her car from the car park. She wasn't talking to me as she'd sent me to Coventry, but the pain on her face made me ask her if she'd like me to go and fetch the car to the front door. My question astonished her, and it took a minute before she could reply. When she said, "Yes, please, if you don't mind," I could see her eyes had filled up with tears. I told her that I understood the pain she was in because I'd once suffered from rheumatism before God had healed me. I took her keys and I braved the weather to get her car, and she gratefully got in and said a genuine thank you before she drove home. That night I couldn't get Brenda out of my mind, and I decided to take a little peace offering the next morning. Before she arrived, I placed a little gift on her desk with a flower on top of it. And as she started to open it, I told her that I'd felt sorry for her the previous day and that this little gift was meant to cheer her up. Softness spread over her face, and she was genuinely pleased that I'd bothered. Over the next few days, she really tried to be nice, but that deep-rooted feeling that she had for me went a little further than the sweetness and innocence which she'd branded me with, and it wasn't long before we were back to normal. This woman's attitude towards me was so bad that my boss decided to do something about it, and he physically removed me from this general office and put my desk in his own office so that I could have his protection and be away from that cold, chilly environment. This, of course, made Brenda worse. For my desk to be moved to my boss's office was totally unethical, and it made all the women's office staff incredibly jealous of the favouritism I was being shown. But she was no longer able to affect me. God had seen my heart and was working on me. But it was only when my inward attitude changed that God was able to change the outward circumstances for me. Remember, when you face an unpleasant situation, don't complain to God about it. He's put the situation there to change you so that you can be conformed to His image. God bless you.